Hello, welcome to another episode of the Evoke Cast. I'm Larry Goldie, and I'll be your host this week. Our mission at Evoke is to inspire, educate, and inform members of the mountain athlete community so they can stay safe while performing their best. We love to interview a variety of members of this community and bring you voices and perspectives that you might not hear every day. Today, it's my pleasure to have Jesse Crocker on the show. Jesse's one of our athletes here at Evoke. He grew up in California, moved to West Yellowstone at age 18, and then spent 5 years ski patrolling in Lake Tahoe. He currently lives in West Central Montana with his wife and son. Jesse was one of the original creators of the Gaia GPS mapping app, something I'm sure a lot of our athletes are well aware of. He wound up selling that application, but recently he has developed a new app, a mapping app called Goat Maps, and that's what we're going to talk a lot about today. So, Jesse, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Hey, I'd love to start out just by hearing a little bit about what brought you to Evoke to work with a coach.
Yeah, I got to the point 3 years ago, I guess, where I realized that doing the things I wanted to do was no longer enough to keep me in shape to do the things I wanted to do. And I actually had to start training to be able to go out and be able to have those big days in the mountains. Um, and then at the same time, also, I was planning a big expedition in Greenland, south to north ski traverse with kites across Greenland, and felt like I really needed to step my fitness up a level to that. So that was when I reached out to Evoke and started really taking training more seriously instead of just going out and having fun all the time.
Got it. Yeah. As we age, we can't just get up off the couch and do all the things that we have been doing for years. I teach a lot of guides courses through the mountain guide program at the American Mountain Guides Association. And I work with a lot of younger guides. And one of the things that we talk about all the time is this concept of youthful vigor. And, all these 20 and 30-year-old guides don't even realize that they have youthful vigor and that it's going to go away at some point. And it takes a lot of work just to maintain that same fitness that you have kind of counted on for years. So, is backcountry skiing sort of the primary thing that you do, or what other mountain sports do you like to partake in?
Yeah, I like to say I do all of the skiings. I spend a lot of time Nordic skiing, backcountry skiing. I just got a split board this year. Um, and then I spent a lot of time kite skiing. So a lot of people have seen kiteboarding on the water. Kite skiing is kind of the same idea. We're on snow with a big kite pulling us around and wearing skis or a snowboard. And then in the summer, backpacking and mountain biking.
Nice. And did you wind up completing your Greenland crossing?
Yeah, we in about 18 days we covered the middle third of Greenland from south to north. We did about 2000 K over 18 days.
Wow. And how many of those days were you able to actually kite for propulsion?
We had 2 days at the start that were walking up a glacier to get onto the actual ice cap. And then from there, basically 14 days of kiting with one weather day in the window or in the middle of that window where there wasn't enough wind to kite. And then one day at the end to get back down to the sea ice.
Okay, nice. Wow. And were you climbing and skiing peaks along the way as well, or were you mostly just crossing the...
No, it was just point to point travel. No,
Yeah.
the area of Greenland we were in, there actually weren't any peaks
Okay.
for 14 days. We saw nothing but a flat horizon.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I would think that would be much more enjoyable when you're being pulled along by a kite than just trudging along on skis. But
Oh yeah,
Eh,
it would have been a 2 month trip on if we were actually skiing the whole way.
Wow. Yeah, that's impressive. And then I mentioned before that you were one of the original developers of Gaia. That's a mapping app that I've used for many years. Do you have a background in cartography, or can you tell me a little bit about how that came about?
Yeah, so I went to 1 semester of college and it was not for me. And then, but during high school, I had done the first couple of years of college computer science courses. And then at age 18, I moved to West Yellowstone, Montana to work for a nonprofit that worked in wildlife conservation, trying to get more habitat for bison outside of Yellowstone National Park. And this organization has teams of volunteers out on cross-country skis every day all winter and recording all of their observations of the bison and of other wildlife they see. And when I got there, that all happened with people filling out paper forms and that data getting entered into a spreadsheet. And I took a look at that and decided that I had the computer skills to come up with a better solution for that. So that was kind of my first foray into the mapping world. So I spent about a year developing a system that was in use for I think almost 15 years to track all of those observations of wildlife and then do data analysis and produce maps with those. Um, And then after working there, I went and spent 5 years ski patrolling. And during that, kind of started to get more into formal avalanche education, went to the National Avalanche School, was getting more involved in the snow safety program at the resort I worked at, and looked at that and saw all these very formalized observations we were making about avalanches, about avalanche control routes, about snow pit data, and recording it on paper notebooks. And that was also right at the time that the iPhone was coming out and we could start writing apps for the iPhone. So then I wrote an app to start recording snow pit data and avalanche data on an iPhone and was doing that at the same time as I was still ski patrolling, working on that in the summer and on my days off. And at that time, it was kind of the when Tahoe was starting to go into the big multi-year drought cycle that started about 10 years ago. I started to think that ski patrolling was not for me. It's was not steady work, and I really didn't think my knees were going to take 30 years of patrolling anyway.
Right?
So decided I should get back into working on computers full time, that maybe go the other route instead of having fun at work, have not quite as much fun at work, but have the time and money and needs to have the fun not at work. Um, so then I was working full time on my Avalanche software. It was called Avalanche Lab. And then saw an ad online from the original two co-founders of Gaia GPS. So I joined Gaia GPS about a year after the company first started,
Okay.
and spent 10 years working there. Kind of led a whole lot of initiatives. When I joined, we just had an iOS app, and then I led starting to produce our own maps and writing an Android app and a website. And eventually, after a couple of years, the original two co-founders decided that I was making a large enough contribution that they gave me an equal share of the company and basically retroactively named me as a co-founder of the company.
Ah, okay. Got
And
it.
I spent 10 years working on that. And then 3.5 years ago, almost 4 years ago now, we sell that off and go and work on other things.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, I know, Gaia was really kind of one of the first big mapping apps that sort of took a huge portion of that space, I feel like dominated that space for a really long time. They were kind of the original one. And, you know, I know so many guides would use that app to create tour plans and do route planning. Uh, it's just, it was the app. I still have so many tracks and, waypoints and recorded tours that in Gaia, and I still use the app today. Uh, and so, but you've left Gaia and now you're kind of coming back into that space with a new app. So tell me a little bit about how that came about.
Yeah, so a couple of years after we left Gaia GPS, one of the other co-founders of Gaia, Anna Johnson, and I were talking and realized we had both been thinking about starting to build a new app in the similar space. You know, I'm always tinkering with gear. I used to make all my own backpacks before I realized that I was not actually that good at sewing, and other people do a heck of a lot better job that than I do. But still, every pack I have, every tent I have has been modified, tuned my own skis. But it just so happens that building an app is a spot where I really do have the skills to build that from scratch and build exactly what I want. Whereas backpacks, other people are better at building exactly what I want.
Right.
Um, so Anna and I talking realized that, we had both surveyed all of the other apps that were out there and tried to figure out what apps we wanted to use for our adventures, and nothing did what we wanted at the time, so we decided we'd start building something new.
Okay. And yeah, what were the sort of features that you felt like were lacking? I mean, at this point, there's got to be 10 plus mapping apps available. You probably have better sense than I do, but
Oh, probably a lot more than that. There's
okay. Yeah.
probably ten that are reasonably popular, and a whole lot of other people that are trying now or have tried in the past to compete in that space.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. What were some of the features that you felt like were lacking in the current batch?
we really wanted to focus a lot on route planning. Route planning is one area where I felt like really no one has been innovating. During the couple of years I took off from work, in addition to going on that big expedition in Greenland and a bunch of other big trips, I spent a lot of time backpacking with my son and decided to go out and just take some classes. So took a couple different classes on route planning and trip planning. Started over on the avalanche education track, which gets a lot into route planning. And both of those things really gave me a good chance to see people who were newer on their outdoor journey in the field trying to use these tools and see the hard parts, see what worked, see what didn't, and just identify the things that felt like they needed improvement. And route planning was really one of those that I sensed there was a lot of area to make it easier and allow people to come up with better plans for trips that could help them be safer by having good plans and have good experiences.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I've played with goat maps a bit. I can't say I'm super well versed in it, but the little bit that I've played around with it, it does seem incredibly intuitive for creating routes and doing tour planning. Uh, and it's funny because a friend of mine in the Wasatch has actually created a business essentially selling uh, tutorial videos on how to use a variety of mapping apps. Uh, because they are, every different app has their own way of doing things, and some of them are incredibly complex. They tend to have a lot of powerful tools, but I would not describe many of the current apps as intuitive. And so is that something that you were really striving for, is creating this intuitive, like, you know, no need for a video tutorial in order to create your first route plan?
That's definitely the goal. I'd say we're still working on it. Kind of my philosophy when it comes to designing this type of app really differs a lot from, I think, a lot of other people's app design philosophy. So if you look at, the kind of classic .com company, one of the big metrics they use is session time. How long is someone looking at your app or website? And you want them to be using your product as long as they can. But the way I look at it, if you are using our app for a large amount of time, it likely means that we've failed. Like, I want you to be looking at the trail. I want you to be looking at the snow. I don't want you to be looking at your phone.
Hmm.
So we think a lot about minimizing distractions in the app and having a map that is really easy to use. The idea is that you should be able to plan your route and look at it, and maybe once an hour, if once every half hour, you're going to pull out your phone and say, like, where am I on this route? But if you have to pull out your phone every 5 minutes, it means that we've screwed up in designing the app. It could be that you were looking at your route and then something else popped up in the app and you looked at that before you put your phone away, and then you don't remember what your next maneuver is.
Right.
So it's hard to articulate exactly what choices we've made as a result of that, but that's kind of the overall guiding philosophy.
Okay. Yeah. It's interesting. With the advent of mapping apps, when I work with guides on guide programs, especially in the alpine and the ski world, uh, it's become the standard for navigation is to have a route plan on your phone, and especially when you're dealing with whiteout navigation. And we have a lot of guides that, will be constantly checking their phone to figure out where they are, to make sure that they're staying on their track. And it certainly gets a little distracting. That's a piece of feedback that we give them all the time. It's like, hey, look at your phone, check where you are, and then get back to navigating in the real world and looking at the terrain in front of you. And that's really different than when I went through the guide program, and GPS was just kind of coming on the scene, and they were sort of clunky, and they didn't have much of a digital display, and we were still using map and compass all the time. And even now, sometimes we'll do what we call analog day on guides courses, where it's like, nope, no phones. You just gotta, navigate us with a map and compass, and, find the way, because people do spend so much time staring at their phones. So if you guys incorporated some tools to help people look at the phone less, one thing that comes to mind when you said that was this idea, when you use a GPS app in your car, and you're on a road for 30 miles before your exit, you can shut the screen of your phone off, and then your phone will just say, in half a mile, use the right lane to take the exit. Is there anything along those lines? Uh, like a point, a navigational point where the phone might give you an alert if it's not in your pocket? Or is that something you guys have talked about or thought about as a way to not check the phone as frequently?
Yeah, so currently we don't do that. In software I've worked on in the past, I think we have done that. And my feeling right now is that I think for at least for more experienced travelers, I feel like that ends up not being helpful. I think it ends up turning into a crutch and letting people ignore their navigation and not think about navigation, but then fall back into this pattern of like, oh, I better check the phone all the time. How long till I get that notification? Instead
Hmm.
of encouraging people to build a good navigation story in their head. So we're focused on trying to build out a good display of the route so you can easily see the elevation profile, see what's coming up, and aid people in building that navigation story so they know, like, okay, yeah, I'm going to climb for the next 2 miles, and then I'm going to get over the pass, and then I'm going to turn right. Um, but also the other part of it too is we're focused on building tools that work well for long journeys. And having a navigation experience that requires the GPS to be on all the time uses a lot more battery. Whereas, I think the with the model we have now, I can get through a 3 or 4 day trip sometimes without having to recharge my phone.
Oh, nice. Even running the whole time.
Yeah, well, so that's without recording a track, with having just navigating on the route. So the GPS only turns on when I actually open the app up, since I'm not recording a track and it's not notifying me about the route, but it'll still show me route guidance when I want to see it.
Yeah. Okay. And are there, you mentioned sort of long distance hiking. Are there other sort of mountain sports that you feel like you developed this app primarily with those in mind?
Yeah, so right now we're building really around the use cases of hiking, backpacking, and backcountry skiing. The app primarily is built for the activities that we do. At one point in the early days of Gaia GPS, we built an app for sailing.
Uh-huh.
And you ask a bunch of hikers to build an app for sailing, and it's going to be garbage because we didn't know anything about sailing.
Right.
So I know there are people out there that have the skills to build products that aren't for their own use. That is, that's not something I'm great at, but so it's really built for the sports that we do. That's not to say it won't work for other things. We've definitely got some work that we're planning on doing because people don't want to have to use a different app driving to the trailhead than at the trail. So it needs to work okay when you're driving also. But yeah, really focused around those human powered sports.
Okay. Yeah. I would say for me personally, I tend to use mapping apps largely for backcountry skiing and alpine climbing. And one of the things I found incredibly helpful for backcountry skiing is having winter satellite imagery. Is that something that's available on Goat Maps or something you guys are thinking about?
It's something we're working on, but it's an expensive problem to solve well. I'm guessing you were probably using FatMap before.
I was a
And
fan of Fat Map.
yeah, so that was one thing they did really well. I don't know how much money they spent on that, but it was a lot.
So,
Recreating that imagery now would, cost us a lot of money. We've certainly talked with people about buying it, and we could go out and raise venture capital money and do that right away, but raising that kind of money would mean building a different product than the product we want to build. But soon we are going to be launching more up-to-date satellite imagery from Sentinel. So not necessarily historical winter imagery, but being able to get imagery from last week and last month.
yeah, yeah, which is also super helpful. The issue there being sometimes you have cloud cover and you don't, you have to scroll back quite a ways to try to find, a good view or high quality representation of the area you're looking at. It makes me wonder though, so like regular satellite imagery that is available, where do you get that from?
So there's a handful of companies that own satellites. Like these are big companies, big defense contractors, and then two different government-owned satellite constellations that produce imagery, one from the US and one from the EU. So there's a whole bunch of companies who basically their business model is to license imagery from those commercial companies, combine it with the government imagery, and produce high quality imagery for the whole planet. It's kind of a really specific task that right now we just rely on other people to do that part of it. So we license that imagery from third parties.
I see. And so to get winter imagery, you'd have to then license that from them as well. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, exactly. And this imagery is not cheap. Like you start very quickly getting into costs of, starting at maybe like $10 a square kilometer, and you
Whoa. Okay.
you scale that up to a mountain range, and very quickly you get into hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you scale that up to a continent, and it's easily millions.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I know, for example, FatMap had winter imagery, but not everywhere, right? So, like
Yep.
certain really popular backcountry ski areas, they would provide that imagery, but you couldn't get it just anywhere and everywhere. And that explains why I've always wondered about that.
Yeah, like they spent a bunch of money on imagery of like sea to sky corridor and of like the whole bunch of the like Southern Canadian Rockies, Banff, Jasper area.
Yeah, well, in Japan, where I was just working as a ski guide, they had all that imagery in the winter, which is super helpful. Uh, and what about three-dimensional views on a mapping app? That's another tool that I've found super helpful. I'd love to hear your perspective on that and if that's something you guys are considering.
Yeah, so we don't have 3D in the app yet. We're kind of just starting to work on the web side of things for route planning on the web, and we will have 3D on the web. And I'm hopeful that we'll have 3D in the app sometime this year, but no guarantees on exactly when that's going to happen yet.
Okay. Yeah. Uh, Once again, that I find when you can take satellite imagery and make it three-dimensional, it just gives you such a good feel for the topography. And from a skiing perspective, you can often see, where openings in the trees are and, you know, just what the sort of ground cover you're going to be dealing with. I live here in the Cascades and we tend to get what we call the green out situation where you're just stuck in dense trees that are no fun to ski. And often there's like a nice open glade not that far away, but when you're in the green out, it's really hard to know where the glade is. And that three-dimensional satellite imagery has been incredibly helpful for sniffing that out.
Yeah, I mostly backcountry skiing. My go-to is the hybrid map that's, all the info from the topo map, but overlaid on top of satellite imagery to be able
Hmm.
to find those breaks in the trees.
Yeah.
Another one of the big features that we worked on, that was actually inspired by when I retook my ARI level one 2 years ago after 20 years, I think. There was a lot of talk about route planning and applying the avalanche forecast in the field and opening and closing terrain for the day. And I watched newer backcountry skiers read that information from the forecast and come up with a plan of like, okay, we're going to stay off north facing slopes over 30 degrees. We're going to stay off anything over 9,000 feet and put that in their head and then open an app on their phone or look at a paper map and start planning their route and just not be able to actually apply that.
Hmm.
Because, knowing that we're going to stay off north facing slopes over 30 degrees and being able to identify those on a map are very different things. Like identifying that terrain on a map is hard,
Yeah.
especially if you're new to it. So one of the early features we built and that I use a lot is this ability to do custom slope shading. So you can very easily in the app select, okay, let's color north facing slopes over 30 red. Let's color everything under 7,000 feet green and just easily customize that that slope angle shading to help with your trip planning.
Oh, okay. That is a cool feature. I wasn't aware of that. Uh, and so when someone's building a route for the day, they could just apply these things. Or if, say, someone had, you know, I teach those airy courses and we encourage people to start building their own little route catalog and, recording tracks and putting lines on maps and creating a library of terrain photos. So if you had your route catalog on the mapping app, you could just apply these shading features and then see what terrain that leaves you that's open and then make a choice that way. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wow, what a great tool.
Yeah, we've done a lot of things with kind of custom terrain processing to really be able to do interesting things with how we visualize terrain. You can also easily apply kind of the standard coloring that people have been using for slope angle shading and avalanche terrain, or color based on aspect, or one that one of our users requested that I've found myself using already is coloring to show flat terrain in the mountains,
Uh-huh.
which is really nice, trying to find campsites to be able to easily visualize where are the flat spots in the mountains.
Right. Well, certainly, or as a split boarder, those flat spots in the middle of a ski run can be super annoying. So that's another helpful tool for moving through the mountains on a snowboard is being able to identify and potentially avoid those flat spots in the middle of a downhill.
Yeah,
Uh, Jesse, I'm curious, do you still carry paper maps when you go in the backcountry?
I do occasionally, but not often. Part of the process for coming up with what we wanted to do in Goat Maps, 2 summers ago, I spent a good portion of the summer backpacking with my son, and I also wanted to teach him how to use paper maps. So we did 2 different week-long trips that we basically just used paper maps for. Um, Partially to teach him and also for me to figure out like, okay, what really are the features that are going to matter in an app? What do we really need to do? Um, and since those couple trips, I don't think I've carried a paper map in a while. I big trips, I'll frequently have my phone and a hardware GPS unit, or on bike trips, a bike computer and a phone, or sometimes even a bike computer and a hardware GPS and the phone.
Yeah. Yeah, for so many years, I've taught people how to use maps and how to navigate with a map and a compass and an altimeter. And even when all these mapping apps really proliferated, I still always had my backup map. And in recent years, I find I'm rarely carrying a map. And when other guides will call me out on it, just they're like, well, you need some kind of backup. It's like everybody in my whole group has a phone, and almost all of them have mapping apps. And if I share our route plan with these folks before we go, I've got, you know, 5 backups in our group. And I tend to carry an extra battery if my phone were to die. So yeah, it feels like carrying paper maps is becoming less and less of a critical thing to do anymore. And so, yeah, I was curious if you actually carried them. I do feel like they can be super helpful when it comes to just zooming out to get the big picture of the terrain you're in and seeing a lot of stuff that's around you, as opposed to looking at a little screen and trying to, pick out what all the mountains around you are. Uh, they still have their place.
Yeah. Yeah, for trip planning, I really like paper maps still, especially coming into a new zone. Like if I'm flying into a backcountry hut somewhere, I want to look at a big paper map.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Uh, do does the Goat Map app work worldwide? Are there any areas that you don't have maps for?
Yeah, so we have coverage mostly worldwide. I think pretty much all of the mapping apps don't work at all north or south of latitude 85, just because of the map projection that pretty much all apps use. And then even past 80, the maps are distorted so badly that they are not particularly useful. So if you're skiing to the South Pole, it's not gonna be super helpful for the last couple hundred miles. But other than that, yeah, worldwide coverage. Currently, our maps are mostly in English worldwide, but we're going to be adding settings soon to show English or local language.
And the maps that people will see worldwide, are they sort of all the same format map, or are there, if you're in Switzerland, do you see the Swiss topo, or in Japan, see the Japanese maps, or is it standardized to one format?
We have we have our house topo map we call goat topo. Our first employee we hired was a cartographer, kind of a industry leading cartographer who has not previously really worked much in the outdoor space. She's worked more for recently for some of the big social media companies and on all sorts of mapping projects, but gave her the task of designing a topo map style for outdoor use with the goal of, having it being really easy to read. 'Cause I feel like you look at a lot of other apps and some of them that have their own map style, it's they took a roadmap and added contour lines. Some of them, it's they tried to copy USGS 7.5 minute quads. But we really wanted to start from scratch and come up with something that would work well from first principles. And I think we've done a pretty good job at it. So yeah, we show that style worldwide. And then we do have on our roadmap to have an option for showing the government topo maps in different places for people that do want to see those government topos because I certainly still use the USGS quads from time to time because there are information on those old maps that hasn't ever really been migrated to the newer digital maps.
Hmm. And so when you take on something like that, like, creating the goat topo layer for Switzerland, uh, does your cartographer literally have to like go through the whole country, or is there a way to overlay your style of map, uh, either over satellite imagery, or I'm curious how that works.
Yeah, so it's all just defining a series of rules for how things get rendered. So first we go through and we have a huge database of roads and trails and break those down into different categories. So we've got like 5 categories of roads and 4 categories of trail. And then say, okay, here's how each of those things gets rendered. And we've got, 5 different levels of administrative borders. How are we going to render each of those? And it's all rule based. So it's not going through individual areas. But then we also pick a bunch of locations as test cases to use. And make sure that things look good in all of those different test locations. And then still, come up with places where things don't look quite right either. I might be traveling around and going somewhere and realize something doesn't work right, or a user sends in a screenshot. Like, so I mostly use our hybrid map most of the time. So contour lines and things over satellite imagery. And this fall, I was in Ecuador climbing and skiing down there. and realized that one thing we had really missed was making sure that those contour lines looked good over large permanent snowfields and glaciers. Um, that, on those big volcanoes down there that are all white all the time, our white contour lines just disappeared
Aha.
because most of our test locations were in the US. So that problem was not coming up. So we added some test locations with permanent snow cover, and now actually just yesterday published a change to our hybrid map that makes those contour lines look much better over permanent snow.
Got it. Nice. And so what do you got in the works? What are some of the features that users can expect to see, coming down the pipe?
Yeah, so we're sometime this year, this spring, I think we're going to launch more real-time satellite imagery from Sentinel that I think a lot of people have probably seen in other apps. That it's a satellite constellation from the European Union. It's not as high a resolution as the normal satellite imagery, but it's updated every couple weeks. And then right now, we're working also on improvements to our route planner to show more detail about the route, breaking down different legs of the route, estimated time, ascent and descent for each leg of the route, and then maybe also including the AMGA has a standard route plan format. So for the guides out there, being able to easily take your route that you've planned in Goat Maps and see it in that standard AMGA format.
Hmm. Yeah, and certainly if you're able to plug in some times, I know we use what we call the Munter method for estimating time, where you put in certain numbers for uphill travel, for downhill travel on skis, and when you build that into your tour, you can come up with a pretty accurate time plan. And I would say for all backcountry users, but especially guides, having a time plan can be really important to know when you're running behind schedule. And when you are behind schedule, that it's better to alter your plan early in the day when you can still do something about it than when it's late in the day and you realize, wow, we're 2 hours off the back and we're not going to get back to the car before dark.
Yep. Yeah. So we use that Munter system in the app for estimating time. And that brings up to another feature we've worked a lot on is being able to quickly replan routes while you're out in the field.
Hmm.
It's you can open the app and in 10 seconds hand draw a line with your finger on the map and get an elevation profile and distance and quickly figure out a new option and figure out how long that's going to take.
Nice. Oh, that's awesome. Well, Jesse, yeah, anything else that you feel like you want to share with our listeners about your app and the future iterations of it?
Not that I could think of. And yeah, if people want to check it out, it's goatmaps.com, Goat Maps on the iOS App Store, and I think
And
we're Goat Maps on most of the social media platforms.
yeah, and just to be clear, you do have an app for Android as well.
No, right now we're just on iOS and Mac.
Okay. And is that something people can expect?
Most likely we will work on an Android app, but no guarantees yet. We're a small team, we're kind of limited to working on one platform at a time, so we need to get the iOS app where it needs to be before we take on another project.
Got it. Okay, I understand. Yeah, I know there are a handful of apps I've seen go that way. I imagine it must be a little easier to integrate with the iOS platform, especially as you're getting started. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's definitely less work. Having all the devices be so similar is a lot easier to deal with
Right.
than dealing with phones from 100 different manufacturers.
Got it. Yeah. Can only imagine. Well, yeah, thanks so much for taking the time today to share this information with us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. All right, and thanks you for joining us today on the EvokeCast. We look forward to seeing you out in the mountains and hope you enjoy all the free information that we at Evoke Endurance continue to provide to help you train and perform better.